My name is Ava Bennett. I'm 31 years old. Right now, I'm sitting on my friend's couch, listening to my phone vibrate itself into exhaustion. The calls started a little over 20 minutes ago. The messages haven't stopped, and somewhere across town, my now ex-boyfriend is probably standing outside my apartment door, reading the same note for the 10th time. Honestly, I think the note finally said what I'd been afraid to say for months. Ethan Carter was 28 when all this happened. We'd been together for 2 years and living together for 8 months. When he moved in, it felt like the natural next step. We talked about everything responsible adults are supposed to talk about: boundaries, bills, respect, communication, building a future. The conversations felt mature, comforting, safe. At the time, I genuinely believed we were building something real. For the first several months, we were happy. We cooked dinner together, watched movies on the couch, spent Sundays grocery shopping and arguing over which cereal to buy. Nothing dramatic, nothing toxic, just normal. Then Vanessa came back into Ethan's life. Vanessa was his ex-girlfriend. According to him, she was going through a brutal breakup and needed support. The first time he went out to see her, I didn't think twice about it. Everyone needs friends. Even exes sometimes. At least that's what I told myself. One night became two. Two became every weekend. Then, weeknights started disappearing too. Soon Ethan was spending more time with Vanessa's friend group than he was spending with me. The excuses were always reasonable. Vanessa's having a rough night. Vanessa needs someone to talk to. Vanessa isn't doing well. I wanted to be supportive, so I ignored the uncomfortable feeling growing in my stomach. Then came the late nights. Midnight became 2 a.m. 2 became 4. 4 became sunrise. Sometimes he didn't come home at all. Whenever I tried bringing it up, he made me feel guilty for asking. One Friday night changed everything. Ethan left around 9. Vanessa's really struggling tonight, he told me, while pulling on his jacket. Don't wait up. I looked up from the couch. Do you know when you'll be back? Not really. Late, probably. Then he kissed my forehead and walked out. That was the last thing I heard from him until dawn. I texted. No response. I called. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. By 3 a.m, I was pacing my living room. Not angry. Worried. There is a specific kind of fear that settles into your chest when someone you love disappears for hours. Your mind starts creating disasters. Car accidents, hospitals, police calls. I barely slept. Then, around 6:30, I heard fumbling at the front door. The lock clicked. The door opened. Ethan stumbled inside. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes were glassy. There was smeared makeup on the collar of his shirt. Not mine. Something inside me tightened. Where were you? I asked quietly. I was worried. He laughed. Actually laughed. God. Ava, you sound like my mother. The words stung more than I expected. I texted you 5 times. Called twice. Your phone went straight to voicemail. My phone died. He tossed it onto the kitchen counter. The screen immediately lit up. 83% battery. We both saw it. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he looked away. Look, I said carefully. I'm not trying to control you, but when we live together, basic communication matters. Just tell me you're safe. Tell me when you're staying out. That's all I'm asking. Then came the eye roll. The one that changed everything. You're not my mother. I don't need a curfew. I'm a grown man. The apartment went silent. I stared at him. He stared back, waiting for an argument, waiting for a fight. Instead, I nodded. I know. For the first time all morning, he looked confused. I kissed his cheek, told him to get some sleep, and walked away. But while Ethan slept until afternoon, I sat alone in my kitchen thinking he was right. I wasn't his mother. I never wanted to be. Then another realization hit me. I wasn't helpless either. The apartment belonged to me. I'd bought it 3 years earlier when the market crashed. My name was on every document, every payment, every piece of paper. Ethan contributed money every month. But nothing formal existed. No lease, no rental agreement, no legal partnership, just trust. And lately, trust was becoming very expensive. The next night, he went out again. This time, he didn't even bother talking to me. I came out of the shower and found a sticky note on the counter. Out with Vanessa. Don't make it weird. I stared at the note for a long time. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I suddenly understood something. The relationship I thought I was protecting no longer existed. Sometime during those months, Ethan had stopped acting like a partner. He was acting like a guest who believed he owned the place. The next morning, I drove to a hardware store. The employee probably thought I was renovating. I bought a deadbolt, a security chain, a few other supplies. Then I spent hours learning how to install everything. By Sunday evening, my plan was ready. At 8 o'clock, Ethan appeared in the doorway. New shirt, expensive cologne, a smile that looked suspiciously excited for someone supposedly comforting an ex-girlfriend. Going out with friends. Have fun, I said. He left. I watched his rideshare disappear from the parking lot. Then I got to work. The deadbolt clicked into place. The chain followed. I packed an overnight bag, printed a short note, and taped it to the outside of the door. The note read, "Ethan, you're absolutely right. I'm not your mother, and you don't need a curfew, but this is my home, and I need people living here to respect basic boundaries. Your belongings will be available for pickup tomorrow afternoon. Text me to arrange a time. Ava." I stared at the note for a moment, then I left through the rear exit. 20 minutes later, my phone exploded. And, judging by the increasingly desperate pounding currently coming through my security camera notifications, Ethan had finally come home. By the time the knocking started, I was already at my friend Connor Hayes' apartment. Connor was 33, divorced, and possessed the kind of calm personality that only came from surviving his own spectacular relationship disaster years earlier. When I arrived carrying my overnight bag, he took one look at my face and handed me a beer. Bad, very, temporary, or permanent? Permanent, he nodded. Good for you. At 4:30 in the morning, my Ring notifications began flooding my phone. Ethan had arrived. At first he looked confused. He tried his key. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. Then he noticed the note. Watching the footage later almost felt surreal. He read it once, then again, then a third time. His face slowly shifted from confusion to disbelief, then rage. The knocking began immediately. 5 minutes later, the text started. Ava, what the hell is this? Open the door. This isn't funny. Answer your phone. I ignored them. The messages kept coming. You can't do this. I live here. Open the door right now. By 5:30, he was pacing outside. By 6, he was sitting against the door with his head in his hands. And by 6:15, he was crying. For a brief moment, I almost felt guilty. Almost. Then I remembered every night I'd spent staring at my phone, wondering whether he was alive. Every lie. Every dismissal. Every eye roll. Every time he made me feel unreasonable for expecting basic respect, the guilt disappeared. Around 7, he finally called a rideshare and left. I thought that would be the end. I was wrong. The next 24 hours became a masterclass in entitlement. My phone received 134 messages. I counted. The accusations escalated quickly. You're abusive. You're controlling. You're insane. I'm calling the police. I'm suing you. My father knows lawyers. His father sold insurance. The threat would have been funnier if he hadn't sounded so serious. Then, social media entered the fight. By noon, Ethan had posted everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, anywhere people would listen. His version of events was impressive. According to him, I had illegally thrown him onto the street because he had friends. Because I couldn't handle his independence. Because I was jealous. Within an hour, Vanessa and her entire circle were flooding the comments. Toxic girlfriend, controlling behavior, emotional abuse. Free Ethan. One comment actually called me a female dictator. That one made Connor laugh so hard he nearly choked on coffee. The funny thing about lies is that they require cooperation, and eventually, someone always refuses to cooperate. For me, that someone was Nathan Brooks. Nathan and I had dated briefly in college, before realizing we worked better as friends. Now, he was one of the sharpest property attorneys in the city. When he saw Ethan's posts, he messaged me immediately. Need legal advice. Desperately. An hour later, we were on a video call. He listened carefully while I explained everything. Was his name ever on anything? No. Lease? No. Mortgage? No. Utility bills? No. Rental agreement? Nothing. Nathan smiled. Well, that's awkward for him. Is what I did illegal? He considered it. Not exactly. Mais sûr, illégal. Much harder to argue, especially without documentation. For the first time since this started, I felt myself breathe. The next day, Ethan arrived for the pickup appointment. Unfortunately, he didn't come alone. Vanessa came with him. So did two friends I'd seen at parties. And his mother, Patricia Carter. The entire group marched toward my building, looking like they were preparing for a court hearing. I already had everything packed. Every shirt, every shoe, every gaming console, every charger, neatly organized in boxes near the entrance. I stepped outside before they reached the door. Ethan immediately pointed toward the building. Let me in. No, I need to get my things. They're right here. His eyes widened. You packed everything. You expected me to live among your stuff forever? Vanessa stepped forward. Her expression carried the confidence of someone who had only heard one side of a story. This is cruel. No, I replied. Cruel is making someone think they're your partner while treating them like an inconvenience. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Patricia looked between us nervously. Ava. Sweetheart. Please don't call me sweetheart. Her face fell. I wasn't angry at her, but I wasn't interested in being managed either. Ethan tried a different approach. I've been paying money every month. I live here. Nathan had prepared me for this. You contributed to household expenses. You never signed anything. You never requested anything formal. You specifically avoided formal arrangements. His expression changed. He knew it was true. The payment notes always said things like groceries, utilities, date night. Never rent. Never housing. Never tenancy. At the time it felt harmless. Now it looked suspicious. One of Ethan's friends glanced toward him. Wait. You never had paperwork. Nobody answered. That silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. Then came the moment that surprised me most. Patricia sighed. A long, tired sigh. Ethan. What? Did you really tell people you were on the lease? His eyes shifted. Not exactly. That wasn't a no. The disappointment on her face was immediate. For the first time, I realized she might not have been getting the truth either. Ethan turned back toward me. Where am I supposed to go? The question might have worked months earlier. Not now. You're a grown man. Figure it out. Vanessa stepped in again. Seriously, that's your answer? I looked directly at her. You've been helping him ignore our relationship for months. Seems fair that you help him now. The color drained from her face. Interesting. A nerve had been hit. Something flashed between them. A glance. A hesitation. A secret. I noticed it immediately. So did Patricia. Nobody mentioned it. But suddenly, the air felt different. The group loaded the boxes into 2 vehicles. Ethan grew increasingly agitated as each box disappeared. The reality was finally sinking in. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't a temporary punishment. This was over. When the final box was loaded, he stared at me. "You're making a huge mistake." "Maybe, but at least it's my mistake." For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then, he laughed bitterly. "You'll regret this." The certainty in his voice sent a chill down my spine. Not because I believed him, because he sounded like someone already planning his next move. As he climbed into Vanessa's car, she squeezed his shoulder. The gesture looked far too familiar for 2 people who supposedly weren't involved. The vehicle pulled away. I watched it disappear around the corner. Then I returned upstairs. For the first time in months, the apartment was completely silent. No excuses, no lies, no tension hanging in the air. Just peace. Unfortunately, the peace lasted less than 24 hours, because the following morning, I looked out my window and saw 2 police officers standing beside Ethan, and the revenge campaign was only getting started. The next morning, I was pouring coffee when I noticed flashing lights outside my building. A police cruiser, 2 officers, and Ethan standing beside them, pointing dramatically toward my apartment. I closed my eyes for a second. Of course, I set down my mug and headed downstairs. By the time I reached the lobby, Ethan was already talking loudly. The moment he saw me, he straightened. "There she is." One of the officers turned toward me. "Mom? This gentleman claims he was illegally removed from his residence." I smiled politely. "I own the apartment." I pulled up the deed on my phone. The officer examined it, then looked at Ethan. "Do you have documentation showing residency?" Ethan immediately produced screenshots of payment transfers. I almost laughed. The officer zoomed in. "Pizza money, movie night, groceries, utilities." He looked confused. "Sir, where does it indicate rent?" Ethan's confidence faltered. "Well, it doesn't say rent specifically." The second officer crossed his arms. "Lease agreement? No. Utility bills? No. Mail? Some. How much?" "Not much." The officers exchanged a glance. I could practically see the conclusion forming. One officer handed the phone back. "This appears to be a civil matter, not a criminal one." Ethan's face reddened. "But I lived there. That alone doesn't establish tenancy." The conversation ended quickly after that. The officers left. Ethan stood in the parking lot glaring at me. For a moment, I thought he might actually apologize. Instead, he pointed at me. "This isn't over." Then, he walked away. Those 3 words should have worried me more, because he meant them. By that afternoon, my building manager called. Someone had reported suspicious activity in my unit. Apparently, multiple people were entering and leaving at all hours. Apparently, I was operating an illegal rental business. Apparently, neighbors feared criminal activity. The accusations sounded ridiculous. Because they were. I sent my Ring footage. My building manager reviewed everything. 30 minutes later, she called back laughing. "Your ex filed the complaint." "Didn't he?" "That obvious." Painfully. Then she told me something interesting. Ethan had tried visiting the building earlier, and he'd attempted to convince security he still lived there. They refused him entry. Strike 2. Tuesday night brought strike 3. A friend texted me a TikTok link. "You need to see this." I clicked, and there was Ethan, standing dramatically in front of a camera, talking about toxic relationships, manipulation, control, abuse, homelessness. Every sentence was carefully crafted to make me look monstrous. The video spread quickly. 20,000 views, then 30, then 50. I expected anger. Instead, I found something surprising. The comments weren't buying it. People began asking questions. Simple question. Why weren't you on the lease? Why didn't you have documentation? Why were you out until dawn? every weekend. Why didn't you communicate? Why does the story sound incomplete? The deeper viewers dug, the worse things became for Ethan. By the next morning, the video had disappeared. Deleted. Unfortunately for him, screenshots live forever. Wednesday afternoon brought a new surprise. A text arrived from an unfamiliar number. This is Michael Turner, attorney at law. I represent Ethan Carter regarding unlawful eviction proceedings. Contact me immediately. I forwarded it to Nathan. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. She was laughing so hard she could barely speak. What's funny? I know him. The lawyer, technically, meaning he's an injury attorney who advertises on bus benches. Housing law isn't even close to his specialty. So what do? Nothing. I'll handle it. A few hours later, Nathan sent a formal response. It was beautiful, professional, but it's easy. Absolutely devastating. No tenancy agreement existed. No legal residency documentation existed. No ownership interest existed. Any continued harassment would result in legal action. 2 hours later, another text arrived. Upon further review, we will not be pursuing this matter. Nathan framed the screenshot. Literally, she printed it and put it in her office. I wish I could say that was the end. It wasn't, because the following morning I woke up to 23 missed calls from my credit card company. My stomach dropped instantly. Nobody gets 23 calls from a bank because something good happened. I called back immediately. The representative sounded relieved. Ms. Bennett, we've detected unusual spending activity. Several luxury purchases. Did you authorize transactions totaling approximately $8,000? No. My voice came out sharper than intended. What purchases? The representative listed them. Designer handbags, jewelry, luxury shoes, accessories. My blood ran cold. I opened my banking app. There they were. 5 separate transactions. Thousands of dollars gone overnight. Then something clicked. Months earlier, Ethan had occasionally ordered takeout on his laptop using my card. The information had been saved. I never removed it, because at the time I trusted him. I stared at the screen. Then I checked the shipping information. My heart stopped. Every order had been shipped to Vanessa's address. The timing was even worse. The purchases started only hours after the fake lawyer threat collapsed. Revenge. Pure revenge. I texted Ethan immediately. Using my credit card is fraud. A response arrived almost instantly. No idea what you're talking about. The purchases were shipped to Vanessa's apartment. Silence. Then, prove it. That one sentence changed everything. Because now I was angry. Not hurt. Not disappointed. Angry. I filed a police report. Submitted transaction records. Shipping information. Screenshots. Everything. The detective assigned to the case moved faster than I expected. Apparently, financial crimes leave very clear trails, especially when the criminal isn't particularly smart. Within 48 hours, investigators obtained security footage from Vanessa's apartment complex. The building had package lockers. And cameras? Lots of cameras. Friday afternoon, the detective called. Ms. Bennett. Yes, we've reviewed the footage, and there's video showing Mr. Carter collecting multiple packages. My eyes closed. Part relief, part heartbreak. We also have footage of him opening them, taking photographs, posing with the merchandise. For a second, I couldn't speak, because even after everything, a tiny piece of me had hoped there was some misunderstanding. There wasn't, the detective continued. Additionally, several images appear to have been uploaded to social media. A mutual acquaintance sent me screenshots an hour later. There was Ethan, smiling, holding designer bags, wearing expensive watches, captioned, "Funny how life improves when someone finally appreciates you." The appreciation happened to be funded by my credit card. The total exceeded felony thresholds, which meant serious consequences. That evening, the detective called again. "We're making the arrest tonight." I sat quietly after hanging up. The apartment felt enormous, empty, silent. Months earlier, I would have cried. Instead, I just stared out the window. The arrest happened 2 hours later. And shortly after that, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Ethan's name. I answered. His voice was shaking. "Ava, please, you have to make this go away." I leaned back slowly. The desperation in his voice sounded strangely familiar, very similar to the desperation I used to feel when he disappeared all night. "You used my credit card. I was going to pay it back." "When?" "Silence. Please. They're talking about charges. Because you committed a crime." His breathing became uneven. This could ruin my life. The words hung in the air. For the first time, I realized something. He genuinely believed consequences were something that happened to other people. Not him. Not Ethan. Not the man who thought rules were optional. I ended the call a few minutes later. Then another call came. His mother, then Vanessa, then several unknown numbers. I blocked every one. But deep down, I knew something bigger had already happened. The arrest wasn't the real disaster. The real disaster was that the truth was finally catching up to him, and I still had no idea how many lies were about to be uncovered. The arrest happened on a Friday night. By Monday morning, half the city seemed to know about it. Maybe not literally half, but that's what it felt like. The screenshots spread fast. The police report spread faster. And the story Ethan had carefully built over the previous weeks began collapsing under its own weight. The same people who had been calling me abusive suddenly became very quiet. Funny how that works. Accusations travel fast. Facts take longer. But facts usually win. Ethan's parents hired a competent attorney almost immediately. Unlike the fake legal threat from earlier, this lawyer actually knew what he was doing. The evidence, unfortunately for Ethan, was overwhelming. The transaction history, the shipping records, the surveillance footage, the social media photos. There was no realistic defense. Eventually, a plea agreement was reached. The felony charge was reduced. Restitution was ordered. Probation followed. Thousands of dollars had to be repaid. Court fees piled on top. His parents ended up covering most of the financial damage. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Patricia called me shortly after everything was finalized. Her voice sounded exhausted. Older somehow. "Ava, I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "I do." There was a long silence. Then she spoke again. "Ethan lied to us. About almost everything." I wasn't surprised, but hearing it still hurt. Apparently, Ethan had told his parents we jointly owned the apartment, that we shared financial responsibilities equally, that I had become irrational after growing jealous of Vanessa, that he was essentially trapped in an unhealthy relationship. Every version conveniently painted him as the victim. The truth had been much less flattering. "Patricia Sahil, I don't recognize the person he's become." "Neither do I." The call ended shortly afterward. I thought that might be the final chapter. It wasn't, because once people realized Ethan had been lying, they started talking, and the truth came pouring out. One afternoon, I ran into Marcus Reed. Marcus had floated around our friend group for years. Nice guy, always polite, always friendly. After exchanging small talk, he suddenly looked uncomfortable. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When exactly did you and Ethan break up?" The question caught me off guard. "Officially, a few weeks ago." "Why?" Marcus stared at me, then slowly shook his head. "That's not what he told me." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "What did he tell you?" Marcus hesitated, then finally answered. "He asked Vanessa out almost 2 months before you kicked him out." I froze. The sounds of the grocery store faded around me. "What?" Marcus looked genuinely confused. He said you two had been broken up for months, that he was only staying at your apartment temporarily while sorting out housing issues. I couldn't speak, because suddenly dozens of moments started rearranging themselves in my memory. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the secretive texting, the defensiveness whenever Vanessa's name came up, the look they shared during the pickup. The pieces finally fit. Ethan hadn't simply been supporting an ex-girlfriend. He'd been building a new relationship while still living in my home. The realization hurt far more than I expected. Not because I still wanted him, but because betrayal always cuts deeper when you finally understand its full shape. A week later, another piece surfaced. One of Vanessa's former friends reached out privately. Apparently, the relationship between Ethan and Vanessa hadn't started after our breakup. It hadn't even started shortly before. According to multiple people, everyone in that circle had assumed Ethan and I were already separated, because that's what he'd been telling them for months. Months. The lies stretched back far further than I'd imagined. The most shocking part wasn't that he lied. It was how many different versions existed simultaneously. He'd been telling each audience exactly what they wanted to hear. To me, Vanessa was simply a struggling friend. To Vanessa, I was basically an ex. To his friends, our relationship was already dead. To his parents, I was controlling. To social media, he was homeless. To himself, I wasn't sure even he knew anymore. The fallout continued. Vanessa eventually distanced herself, whether it was embarrassment or self-preservation. I never found out. Several mutual friends stopped speaking to him entirely. Others quietly disappeared from his life. People can forgive mistakes. Lies are harder. Patterns of lies are harder still. Then came the professional consequences. Ethan worked for a trendy marketing agency, where image mattered almost as much as performance. The arrest report circulated. The viral posts resurfaced. The fraud story spread. Officially, he wasn't fired. Unofficially, his career trajectory hit a wall. Client-facing responsibilities vanished. Major projects disappeared. Within weeks, he resigned. Not long afterward, I heard he was working a temporary retail job near his parents' neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd spent years mocking people who lived with their parents as adults. Now he was back in his childhood bedroom. Life has a strange sense of humor. As for Vanessa, their relationship didn't survive either. Apparently, trust became an issue. Imagine that. A relationship built on deception, struggling with trust. Who could have predicted it? Months passed. Then more months. Slowly, the apartment began feeling like mine again. I repainted the walls, rearranged furniture, donated things I didn't need, opened windows I had kept closed. The changes were small, but they mattered. Each one felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The silence that once felt lonely started feeling peaceful. The anxiety disappeared. I stopped checking my phone at 3 a.m, stopped wondering where someone was, stopped making excuses for behavior that hurt me. Eventually, I met someone new. His name was Ryan. We met through a local climbing group. The first time he was running late, he sent a message 20 minutes beforehand. Simple, respectful, normal. The fact that such a basic act felt extraordinary said a lot about my previous relationship. One evening, nearly a year after everything happened, Connor and I sat on my balcony sharing drinks. The city lights glowed below us. After a while, he asked the question everyone eventually asked, "Do you ever feel bad about how things ended?" I thought about it carefully. Then I smiled. "No, not really." Connor raised an eyebrow. "Not even a little." I shook my head. Ethan told me I wasn't his mother. He was right. I wasn't. Being someone's partner doesn't mean accepting endless disrespect. It doesn't mean sacrificing your peace so someone else can avoid responsibility. It definitely doesn't mean providing a home for someone who treats you like an obstacle instead of a person. Connor laughed. You know, that note really destroyed him. Maybe. I took a sip of my drink. The funny part is how simple it was. No insults. No threats. No screaming. Just the truth. You're right. I'm not your mother. For a long moment, we sat quietly. The breeze moved through the balcony. Below us, the city carried on. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably still telling people his version of events. Maybe he genuinely believed it. Maybe he didn't. It no longer mattered, because eventually every story reaches a point where reality catches up, and when it does, excuses stop working. The truth becomes impossible to ignore. For Ethan, that truth arrived in the form of consequences. For me, it arrived in the form of peace. And if there's one lesson hidden inside this entire mess, it's this. The moment someone repeatedly shows you they don't respect your boundaries, believe them, not because they might change, but because you deserve better than waiting around to find out if they ever will.